Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Remember, this is a start of a new chapter, so you can draw a line in your notes or get out a different piece of paper. None of this is on the test. That will be a part of your grade-raising opportunity that ends on Sunday. Remember, that is all imperialism. This is progressives. Don't get the populists and the progressives confused. Many times people do this. There are populist roots in the progressives, but they are two different groups, and we're going to look today at how to tell the difference and begin to introduce progressives. I need you to watch this before you come to class on Monday, and make sure that you take some notes, because that will be your entrance ticket into class on Monday, so we can continue on and try to maybe at least end in a good place before everyone leaves on Wednesday. So here we go. So who are these progressives? Well, there are going to be three progressive presidents, and progressivism is not tied to a party. It is not a Democrat idea. It is not a Republican idea, although Democrats and Republicans will both use them. You might notice here that it is tied to Roosevelt in this section, and that this is going to go up until about 1912. So we're going to work through Roosevelt, we're going to work through Taft, and we're going to work through Wilson. Those are our three progressive presidents. So what is progressivism? Well, let's get started. And here we go. All right, so it is a progressive era. Things like social justice, the environment, better working conditions. We're going to walk through four things that progressives believe in, and that are going to change America during this time. So, progressives. From 1890 to 1917, progressives were reformers who attempted to solve problems caused by industry, growth of cities, and laissez-faire. Yeah, these are three things that come into the Gilded Age, right? Labor versus management. America moves to the city, sanitation, skyscrapers, worker housing, and laissez-faire. Now, there's that idea again that we seem to find in the Constitution, although it is not specifically mentioned there. Is the government supposed to keep hands off of everything when it comes to their role, and especially in business? Should government see the side of the worker? The workers are the people. Is it not a government of we the people? So far, we've seen a government, remember, come down on the side of what? Yeah, that's right, management. Right? They sent in troops to make sure the trains ran. They sent in troops to make sure that businesses opened back up. But progressives are going to say, hey, there have been some problems. There have been some problems. And there ought to be a way to solve this. So let's solve the problems brought about by the Gilded Age. So progressives were usually white Protestants. Remember, the idea of Catholic immigration is still a thing at this time period, but they're generally white Protestants who are going to use this new idea of the social gospel that we'll talk about. They are middle class, and they are native born. They're going to solve the problems here in America. Maybe these problems were created by immigration, maybe not, but it is white, native born, middle class Americans. These are the people who want to see a better America. They're often college educated. They've gone to school. They know how to study an issue. They know how to graph it. They know how to chart it. They know how to go out and get statistics, right? These aren't people who are just going to say, hey, that seems like a problem. Well, is it really a problem? Is there a way to solve it? And then as they solve it, they're going to continue to chart it and graph it and write about it. And, you know, is there a better way? They also are going to be social workers. These are people who work out with the people who are most affected by the Gilded Age. Right? What are their lives like? What do their houses look like? What's going on with children? And scholars. They're going to study an issue maybe even to death. Right? There's got to be a scholarly way to approach sanitation. There's got to be a scholarly way to approach transportation. There's got to be a scholarly way to approach, again, urbanization. Surely we can design our cities better, and we can get around better, and we can get all the garbage out of them better. And so things like city planners will come about. And politicians. Yes, politicians will become progressives. Right now, politicians, many of them are party bosses. They have a lot of control. Some of them are in the pocket of business because that's where their money comes from. But some politicians begin to wise up and say, there are a lot more working class out there and middle class out there than there are those at the top. And if they all voted for me, we could break a boss system or a business system. Preachers get involved because it is a social gospel. Remember when we started this country, we talked a lot about Puritans, and the reason you were sick was because you were a sinner. The reason your crops didn't grow because you were a sinner. The reason your cow didn't get milk, you were a sinner. We've often thought about those that were lazy and homeless and unproductive and having a bad time that had something to do with their spiritual condition. Well, all of a sudden, these people find a new part of the Bible, right? It's not really new. It's just they begin to focus on it. Probably Matthew 5, 6, and 7, right? This idea of how you treat your fellow man. We often call this the Sermon on the Mount in religious circles. They're going to realize that, hey, I have an obligation to these people. I should help these people. These people are children of God too. And so we're going to see a lot of preachers encourage their congregation. So we see things like soup kitchens, clothing closets, food drives. Remember, up till now, had you gone to a church and said you were hungry or you were homeless or you needed clothes, they would have said, go get a job, get right with God. They may not have realized that there were actual needs you could not overcome. Most of you probably that are part of religious groups have these things now. You have a clothing drive or a food drive, especially around holidays. I will remind you, hungry and homeless people eat all year round. And you believe it is showing the care of Christ for them. All right. So, we also see teachers. Remember, children are going to school. We're seeing Americanization, assimilation. Maybe we should teach better love for our fellow man and acceptance of other people, but also say, hey, here's what it should look like, right? This is what a good American should look like and care about. And lastly, writers. This is the time of novels that are going to be written to show a problem, and you fall in love with the characters and you see their plight and you say, hey, something ought to be done about that. Pamphlets are put out, poetry. We see the progressives doing lots of things, mostly books and articles, though, especially in scholarly journals. We're going to see female writers, right? Females may not be allowed to stand up in front of a group of men and talk, but they can write about it. They can put an article in a women's magazine. And women can all of a sudden realize there are political issues they should be concerned about. But hold on, women don't vote. Well, what if they did? Would these be the issues that women would care about? Will it change the politics of America? So the progressives are very important as we head into this time period. So, progressives, they believe reform equals progress. They believe if you change something, things will get better. They are all about change. They are all about the future. They believe that reform is always possible and good, that change is going to bring about a better society. They also believe progress is not inevitable, but is often blocked by ignorance and corruption. So again, those teachers, right, educate. Corruption, let's get rid of those party bosses who only want something for themselves. And everyone and everything can be improved. Guys, we kind of believe this today, right? You can come to America and you can be anything. Is it part of that rugged individualism we saw, part of the Frederick Jackson Turner thesis? Or is it just this idea of those Horatio Alger novels? Or it is the idea that, hey, you can keep growing and going. And traditions are suspect. Why have we always done it that way? Is it the best way? I mean, I've talked to you guys about school. Is this the best way to have school? And I don't know. Will your generation redesign and refine school? Is this the best way to work? Is this the safest way to do something? Is it the most efficient way, right? All those guys going out doing that scientific study of how long it takes to do something and how to do something. And experts can always find a better way. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a faster way, a cheaper way, a more productive to society way. And so we need experts to tell us these things. So things have to be studied and written down and statistics. And education and purity equal progress. We're going to teach a new American morality, maybe, a new American way. We're going to look at the idea of what a good American is. What do they care about? What do they act like? How do they dress? How do they treat morals in these situations? And we're going to, once we get all this right, the world will want to be like us. Remember, this is a continuation of imperialism in a way, social Darwinism in a way. But again, we're back to that idea of what? City set on a hill. And eventually we'll wind up with Wilson, a very moral president in his thinking. So, those are who progressives are. Now, how does it begin? Where does this movement begin of progressives? Well, I'm glad you asked. We often think of populists among the farmers, right? Let's remind ourselves. Farmers had begun to organize in the 1870s. And they had the Grange, you might remember. And then they had the Farmers Alliance. So it kind of started at a local level, moved to a state level, and then eventually they got a political party, the Populist Party, the Party of the West, right? It moved to a national level. We often call this grassroots, something that starts among the people and moves upward through the process. Well, those are the populists, but those ideas are also going to be progressive ideas. So, progressives, they adopt these populist ideas. Like what? Well, let's move away from laissez-faire and let's let the government regulate parts of the economy. Let's make the economy more fair. Well, business isn't interested in that. They have monopoly, right? Maybe government needs to step in and say some businesses have too much power. Make the U.S. government responsive to people, voting. We're going to see the progressives really push this idea of bringing democracy back to America, that voters matter. And what if we limit the power of the political boss? What if we make sure that it is the people who run the government, not the political boss and not the business owner? Improve workers' rights, conditions for the poor, for immigrants. These are things that have grown in America. They're obvious when you walk through our cities. Clean up our cities. Let's get better sanitation. Let's get clean water. Let's get running water that comes into housing and sewage that takes the waste away. People who pick up our trash. You might remember you watched a video on this, right? You watched The Story of Us in American cities about people who realize if they clean up their cities, there's less disease. Maybe we clean up crime. Remember, we go back to that novel that you read over Christmas break. And let's end segregation and Jim Crow. Let's look at the American South and let's go back and revisit this idea of the end of Reconstruction and what was it supposed to look like. Now, that's the one that we're going to talk about a little bit later. We're going to read a court case about this, and we'll begin to build now a story of the American Civil Rights Movement. It starts during the Progressive Movement. So, how are they different, right? How are they different? Because one, it's not just time period, but it is time period. Make sure you know when the populist time period was and when the progressive time period is. Populists tend to be rural, right? Farmers, Westerners. Progressives tend to be in cities, where the people are, where they see the problems. Populists tend to be poor and uneducated. Again, the American rural farmer, the American rural worker. Progressives are middle class. They're educated. They know they can solve problems. They know they're smart enough. Populists tend to be too radical. They create their own political party. They want socialism, the labor movements. Well, progressives stay in the political mainstream. You could be a progressive Democrat or you could be a progressive Republican. The progressives don't form their own party. So we're back to a pretty strong two-party system. And the populists fail. They don't elect a national political candidate. Now, they do elect some local candidates, some governors, and maybe a senator or two, right? But they don't really ever elect a president, even though William Jennings Bryan tried. Progressives will succeed. They will change things. Cities will look different. Candidates will talk about different things. Party bosses will come down, and business will lose some of its power. And the worker and the voter will become important again. So, progressives. What areas need to be reformed? Progressives key in on four things. First of all, social justice. We need to make society better, more equal. Political democracy. You need to have a better chance to participate in government. Economic equality. We should all be able to make a living, a good living, maybe a living wage. We should all be able to support our families and have somewhere that money then pays for the basic necessities. And lastly, conservation. I got to warn you here, my environmentalists. This is not the conservation that you see in modern world. This conservation is going to look a little differently, and we'll talk about that. It even involves American presidents. But you're going to see some things come out of this time period that you still have today, like national parks. So let's break each of these four things down for just a second. So, social justice, what does that mean? Improve working conditions in industry. Regulate unfair business practices. Eliminate child labor. Well, what are you going to do with all those kids? You're going to start schools and help the immigrants and the poor. Churches get involved in this. Some of you are part of churches that have social justice. You may even think social justice is a relatively new term with some of the things that have gone on in the last few years as you have become historically and politically aware. But social justice, we're going to help the working person. Again, we're going to make sure that if you want to go into a business, that there's not unfair competition. We talked about some of the things that those robber barons did. Let's look at political democracy. Give the government back to the people. Get it away from those corrupt business owners. Get it away from those corrupt political bosses. Get more people vote. There are more people in America. Surely if people got together and came together, we could solve and resolve. And economic justice. Let there be fairness in the work world. Let's regulate unfair trusts. Let's break up monopolies. And let's bring about some changes in labor. Let's respect the worker, not the boss. We're going to demonstrate that the common people, that the U.S. government is on their side. When a strike happens, shouldn't the government care about their voters, their people? We're going to see a president for the first time come in on the side of the workers. Wow, that's a shift in American politics. And lastly, conservation. Well, what does that look like? Preserve natural resources and the environment. Now, we got to be careful. This does not look exactly like you may be thinking. We're not going to set aside thousands of acres to make sure that they are pristine forests. Well, we'll do that, I guess, with the national park system. But sometime land is going to be set aside because there's minerals on it, and the government's going to control who can get those minerals out and what that looks like. They're still going to go in and destroy sometime the land, but we're managing how that might look and what it might look afterwards. Conservation may not be help endangered animals, but if you kill endangered animals, stuff them and send them to a museum so that everyone can see them before they all die. And so again, this isn't like go out and find out what animals are beginning to disappear because of maybe clothing trends or we're taking away their environment. But if we realize there are animals, let's kill a bunch of them, let's stuff them, let's put them in museums, everybody can go see them and see what nature looks like, right? So conservation is going to look a little different than maybe you're thinking of that word. So as we head into these progressives, there are three, write them down, 3 progressive presidents. Theodore Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909. Remember, he is going to become president because of an assassination. He was vice president. William Howard Taft, only going to serve 1 term. All right, he's going to be a 1-term president. Later, we'll move on to the Supreme Court. And then the last progressive president is going to be because of the 1912 election. Now, the first 2 are Republicans. They are progressive Republicans. But because of the 1912 election, which will get a whole little part of a lecture of its own, the Democrats come back to power. Yeah, the Democrats. Remember, the Democrats had Cleveland twice, but every president since the Civil War up till now has been Republican, right? Except for those 2 Cleveland things. Well, how did the Democrats get control of the White House again? What happened? Well, what have I told you before? When one party can't get its act together, it gives it to the other party. So look for that. And that's Woodrow Wilson. Now, Woodrow Wilson will be president until 1921, but the progressive movement is going to come to a stop. And it's going to come to a stop because of World War I. World War I gets us involved in international affairs. You're still going to see some progressive ideas throughout the war, and you're going to see a group of people who have to decide, do they continue pushing their progressivism or set it on the back burner until the war is over and pick it up again? And they'll actually choose to continue to press their progressivism. And so some women are going to take a stand on an issue that can't be set aside for World War I. How can you go make the world safe for democracy when you don't even have democracy at home? So those are things that we'll be looking at with the progressives. There's that women's issue I've talked about. Yes, we're going to finally get to a point where women are going to start talking again about the vote. We saw that in the 1850s, right? We saw that in 1848 with Seneca Falls Convention, but that issue seems to have gotten lost. So let's bring it back to the surface. And yes, war. These are pictures actually of World War II, but they're in your book. But yes, war is going to stop the progressive movement in some ways. So these are the book slides. You can pause and look at them right here. Those outlines are available online. These slides are available online. Hint, you can read the book. So, how do we get social justice? Let's talk about social justice for a little bit. There are 2 books. John Spargo, The Bitter Cry of Children. He is going to look at child labor. He is going to go in and say, who is mining our coal? Who is making our goods? Who is processing our food so that we can live so cheaply? And he finds a lot of it is children. Children who are not getting an education, children who are being used up. They're a cog in the machine. Children who, again, can be used and abused when it comes to labor practices and pay practices, hired and fired at will. You also have Jacob Riis, who's going to go in. You may remember him from the documentary you watched. He's going to go in and take pictures of where these people live and what conditions they live under. So that's one thing. The photographer, remember the writer, the investigator, the journalist is going to change this time period because they're going to go in. Today, if you watch TV sometime, a news station will have like an investigative journalist. Well, that comes out of this time period, right? Whose job is it to investigate and make sure that business and the government are doing their jobs? So, is this how you picture a laborer in 1890? And if you look around that room, it's pretty much middle school age boys, maybe early high school age boys. There's metal shavings. There's fire in there. They're making things. But again, they're fueling the industrial growth of America. Well, what about their future? What about possibility to educate themselves? Well, they're really not there. You like oysters? Eating canned oysters? Well, this is the kid who is going to shuck those oysters. They're going to open up those shells, and notice he's barefoot, walking on shells. He's taken his whatever he's shucked for the day and thrown it there for a few minutes, and you're going to have all these piles of shells, and all that food's going to be processed and go to a nice little tin can, and then you're going to be able to eat it for a very good price. And you don't even have to live near the ocean. But this kid isn't in school. He may not be learning to read or write. He may not even speak English. And what about this? What about the idea that your home is warm and that you have electric lights because kids are crawling around underground in coal mines and dying? Is that who we are as a country? Is that what we are? Here's a story about a young man who broke his leg in a mine, another kid who fell down. Again, these aren't kids out playing somewhere. They're working for a living. And that's what coal miners look like. You see, when I think of a coal miner, I think what? 35, 45-year-old male, and today with all kinds of mechanical equipment. Yeah, these kids are small. They fit into those little areas where coal can be mined. They're going to grade the coal. They're going to push the coal. They're going to be underground for hours and hours and hours a day. They're going to breathe in that dust. They're not going to see the sunlight during certain times of the year. They're going to be caught in mine collapses just so we can be a little warmer and have some electricity. Is that right? Well, that's what they're questioning. And what about your clothes? Right? You like fast fashion? You like all those dresses and shirts you can have, ladies? Well, here's the little girl who makes it possible. She keeps all those bobbins full of thread so that those machines can weave that cloth so we can have cheap clothing. And there you go. There's a coal miner. Notice he's unbuttoned the top of his shirt. You can see his skin. The darker part of his skin is the coal dust. He has a lamp on the front of his head, right? It has a flame on it so that he can see underground. What happens if he opens a pocket of natural gas? Yeah, an explosion, killing him and all the children working around him. So again, he's gone down to the mine that day, and this is what he looks like when he comes back up. What do his lungs look like? How long is he going to live? And what about people who are working in tenements? Right? What about those that are doing sweat labor? Again, doing it by the piece. What about kids who are kept there in that apartment sewing, putting buttons on, and cutting out patterns? Or what about those kids who work in the mill? Here's a kid who works in the clothing industry but can't afford shoes. Can't afford shoes. And look at those young boys. What, 8, 9 years old, maybe 10? Look at all that machinery worrying about them. What happens if they fall into it or if they get hurt? If they don't show up, they'll just hire another kid. Here's some young men who are sorting coal. The coal has come out of the mine, and they're sorting it into different types and kinds. Notice the young man on the right-hand side. It looks like he's got this metal pole in his hand. He's not beating the kids, although that probably went on. He actually controls the speed of the conveyor belt as they grade the coal. Notice some of the kids have taken a few pieces of wood to kind of make them a seat, just to make it a little more comfortable. And look at how dingy and dusty this picture is. And they're breathing that in as it comes down the assembly line of coal every day. Look at those windows, very little sunlight. And you got some boys making sure the other boys are working harder and they're working faster. Again, is this who we are as America? Or this? What about these kids? How many of you had signs that say, we want to go to school? You know, more school, less hospital. Wow. Again, a machine shop run by kids, making parts for the industrial machine run by kids. Are they learning a trade? Yes. But are they learning anything else? And what happens if the company shuts down? What's their next prospect if they can't read or write? You ever think about processed food? These people are these people are shelling beans. The company doesn't even give them seats. They're working on the baskets the beans come in. And so they're processing, getting the beans out of the shells. Notice how many kids and women are in this picture. And then look at all that machinery behind them. That'll take and process them and cook them and steam them and then put them in cans so that you can have a can of peas. And these people will sit here for 8, 10, 12 hours a day just so we can have some cheap food. Again, is this what you picture as a factory worker? Well, for part of America, that's what it was. It kept costs down. You could pay children less. So, where do all these progressive roots come from? Again, a book slide. So, let's talk about this social gospel movement. Let's talk about this idea that maybe the teachings of Christ are to go out and help the poor, right? Blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the kingdom of God. Right out of Matthew, right? This idea that we're to love our neighbor, how we treat our fellow man. Well, they're going to be charity organizations, but again, they get to decide who gets the help. Is it going to be a poor native-born American? Is it going to be an immigrant? Well, they want these immigrants to adopt American ways, so they're going to open up and help them through this process, right? That social gospel movement is going to be preached, and so churches are going to start collecting clothes and helping to feed the hungry, helping maybe to offer a program on Sunday mornings for kids. On Sunday mornings, the day kids don't work, they can come to church and go to school. You know it as Sunday school. Even adults sometimes came to Sunday school. They didn't always were taught Bible lessons. They may be taught how to read or write or do arithmetic. And hopefully then the kids would stay and the adults would stay and go to service. Now, once government takes over education and every kid goes to school, many churches kept those as a way to teach kids the Bible. And so some of you have gone to Sunday school your whole life, not realizing its roots, right? And then we have people like Jane Addams. We talked about her a little bit in a chapter 2 ago. She is going to be an educated woman who wants to help immigrants. We're going to see women changing society. And they look around at who is struggling, and it's immigrants. And they found these houses called Hull houses in Chicago and other places. The last one actually closed about 5 or 6 years ago. They were still open. You know, where does an immigrant go today to have his mail or her mail translated? Or when notes come home from school in English? A lot of us forget that we still have a lot of immigrants in America today. You know how to fill out a job application. You know what it means when it says first name, last name. What if that's not what they mean in their culture? Or even what does first name, last name mean? What happens when they go in and they're told, oh, you just fill out an application online? Well, what if they don't have online? Or they don't understand the directions because English is not their first language or their language at all? How do you learn about American culture? How do you learn about cooking and cleaning and all the things that are American? Well, Jane Addams is going to open a place for that to go. I don't know where immigrants go today. You know, we often complain that immigrants find little communities and form their own communities, like a certain apartment dwelling group, maybe in Nashville. Well, it's because they speak the same language and they're helping each other out because no one else seems to be doing that. So Jane Addams is going to change that in her time. So here she is. This is Jane Addams. Again, female, educated, wanting to change society. She might not can vote, but it doesn't mean she can't have a voice and do something with her life that isn't a mother or a daughter or a wife. So they're going to provide educational, cultural, and social services. They're going to bring adults in and provide childcare, so the adults can learn to fill out applications or to answer questionnaires. I mean, things that to register to vote, things that you and I just take for granted because we can read and write. They're going to have nurses go and visit the sick to try to keep epidemics from breaking out. And they're going to help them again with finance. Like, how do you open a bank account? Well, what is a check? How do you deposit money? How do you pay bills? I mean, these are all things that we just all take for granted because many of you have classes like what? Personal finance. So we're going to provide centers for education. And people are going to be able to go as immigrants and learn, quote, how to be better Americans, but also get a lot of just help in the real world, real life things. They're also going to look at where these people live and are they being paid correctly? How do you know the law? How do you know if you're being paid right? How do you know if you're being used in a way that you shouldn't be used? Unless someone tells you, hey, that's against the law. Maybe that might even be unconstitutional, right? So in 1889, these settlement houses open, and they open all over. 400 of them will be established pretty quickly. And like I said, they were still in existence until just a few years ago. So, progressives. There's your slide. I don't know any other way to do this but to just give you the names. So this could be a future matching, hint, hint, hint. These are just people you need to know. And so I put them on here and what they wrote and what they did. I put some pictures on here so you can see what they look like, so what people, educated intellectuals look like from this time period. What are they writing about? What are their complaints? Well, let's just walk down the list. So I'd take some notes on this. So Henry Dershowitz Lloyd writes Wealth Against Commonwealth. And he starts talking about the Standard Oil Company and its practices and how that maybe they are not good for us like we thought. Again, he's taking on a giant. Thurston Veblen, The Theory of the Leisure Class. He criticizes people who make money just to make. Like, how many more millions do the Rockefellers need? How many more millions do the Morgans need? I mean, they're just out there building mansions and houses and going on these huge trips and building these little cabins in the woods. And these cabins in the woods have like 18 bedrooms. Yeah, I mean, what about people who, are you using that money to help society? And we looked at this, remember. Jacob Riis, we've already talked about him, right? How the Other Half Lives. Again, he shows the squalor in New York slums. And Theodore Dreiser, right? He writes, again, The Financier and The Titan. These are fiction. These are books. These are novels. But they kind of hint what the life of those people who are in big business do and what they say and how they think. I know this may be a little bit out for some of you, but some of you at least are probably familiar with The Hunger Games, right? The Hunger Games is a novel, but it's a lot about what? Economics. There's a rich section of the town and there are poor sections of the country, and they provide certain good. Again, it's kind of an economics textbook told in story form. And everybody does all their little part to support Capital City where all the rich people. Well, they're writing novels too, right? About these things. Maybe you've watched other movies. The Avatar series. Maybe you've watched sorry, I forgot their name. But Divergent, right? All those things about, well, how do we think and what are parts of society? Those are novels to get you to think. But if I sit down and say, hey, you want to read a psychology paper? Hey, you want to sit down and read an economics textbook? A lot of you would say no. But if you put it in a way that's a story and that people might begin to understand it better, then yes. And so you do. All right. There's a group of people in this time period, again, they're writers, called the muckrakers. We're going to talk about the muckrakers. They love to look down in society and bring the dirt and corruption to the surface. If you've ever walked into a creek or you've waded in a pond, your feet kind of sink into that stuff on the bottom. That's muck, right? And it kind of brings it, stirs it up and floats it up to the surface. Well, that's what these people are going to do. They're going to look around and say, hey, let's break through the gilding. Let's break through the gilding of the Gilded Age. And what's underneath it? Well, it's not pretty. Lincoln Steffens is going to write The Shame on the Cities. And he's going to talk about corruption and bribery and all those things we talked about with party bosses. Ida Tarbell is going to write exposés in McClure's magazine. It was a women's magazine, right? And she's going to talk about ruthless business. Why would women care? Because it affects the way they spend their money. Many of the women control the money in the household. And going to talk about John Rockefeller and Standard Oil Company. Now, she also had a little revenge here because her father's business had been ruined by him. Thomas Lawson talks about the stock market and speculation. He talked about how he made $50 million himself playing the market. I talk about stocks in here, right? They're up, they're down, but they're people who are getting filthy, stinking rich, they might say, off of other people's labor through the stock market. And maybe they have inside information. They know a company's about to do better. And David Phillips, who writes The Treason of the Senate. He writes in Cosmopolitan. We think of that as a women's magazine. And he said 75 of the 90 senators, now remember, all the states aren't there yet, 75 of the 90 senators were representing big business instead of the people. That again, big business supported them. Remember, we saw that with Mark Hanna in the McKinley campaign. So who supports politicians in your lifetime? What's going on in cities in your lifetime? I mean, let's kind of think about that. You got John Spargo, already looked at some of his stuff, right? The Bitter Cry of the Children. Ray Standard Baker, who wrote The Color Line. And it was talking about what was going on in the American South when it came to the Southern black story, right? Well, what's happening? You know, has the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment changed everything? Is the Freedmen Bureau just solved all those problems? No. I think you know that. And so what's going on in the South now? Most people had turned their way to the West with the Indian crisis, or they had turned their way to the economy. They had kind of forgot. And then you got people like Dr. Harvey Wiley, the crusading chemist, right? Some of you are going to be taking AP Chem. Wiley, by the way, there's a great documentary on this on PBS. Wiley has people eat food and see, are they healthier? Like, what's really in those cans of food? Do you know it's what it says on the label? Is it chicken? And was some chemical added to make it last longer? And what does that chemical do to your body? He had this group of guys who he called the Poison Squad. And he fed them these chemicals that were in food to see what it would do to their body. And sometimes it made them very sick and ill and caused all kinds of health problems. So what about our food? I mean, yes, it's cheap, but is it healthy? Is it good? I mean, we still have these debates today, right? So muckrakers, again, they love to show the problems. Now, we got to talk about the other side. They love to dig up the dirt, but they don't always have an answer. Some of you are good at that. You like to point out what's wrong. Look at that. It's wrong. Oh, look what you did. It's wrong. Oh, look, there's a problem. But you don't ever come up with an answer. I like those of you who are in Model UN or Youth in Government because you get to formulate bills that might solve a problem. I like those of you who go out and join organizations that try to solve some of these problems. Some of you have worked at food banks, or maybe, again, you donate to your local church for some of the things going on there. It's important. Again, it's very easy to show the problems. The hard part is solving them. And so these muckrakers often rake the muck to the surface. But again, they're hoping educated people, scholars, regular people like you and I will do something about it. So the muckrakers, right? They're journalists, photographers who are going to expose the abuse of wealth and power. And they felt it was their job to write and expose corruption in the city, in industry, in the government. And again, you were supposed to have a reaction to it. Progressives exposed corruption. But again, they offered no solutions. But somebody could come up. We had to realize it was, somebody's got to say, hey, it's a problem first, and then let someone else solve it. So, let's rake the muckrakers, right? They are a group of people who emerged, and they published in magazines like McClure's, Collier's, Cosmopolitan, everybody's. They're called muckrakers by Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of Teddy Roosevelt going to be in this chapter, right? I know we haven't talked about him coming to the presidency yet, but we will. But this is that era there. And so Teddy Roosevelt is going to call them muckrakers, is going to bring all that up. Now, you think, do the muckrakers have any impact? Yes. They're going to write books. One of the books is going to be read by Teddy Roosevelt. And he realizes there's a problem with America's food system. And he's disgusted by what he reads in the book. And he discovers, after some research, that it's true. It's not just a book and pointing out all the, I mean, it's pretty predominant throughout the food system that they're using things that are probably not meant for us to consume, or they're using chemicals to make that food last longer than maybe it should, and they don't even know what the effects of that are. Remember, we used to put things in tin cans with lead solder. They used to put the lid on with lead, and the seam or the can bent around, and they put lead. Well, that lead leached into. I mean, what is that doing to people? Remember Britain? Those of you who are in AP Euro, we talked about the Adulterated Food Act, way back in like the 1840s and 50s. America's not going to get around to thinking about what's in their food until almost the 1890s, 19 teens, right? So there's the muckrakers. And what about people who have to live like this? We've looked at this picture before. We've talked about immigration. Well, are we going to solve it? And who can solve it? Women. Women are going to step forward to solve during this time period. Women are now going to college. And when they get their degree, they want to use it. They don't want to have a degree just to be a stay-at-home mom. Nothing wrong with that. But they want to be seen as professionals. Again, many women went to college. They're finishing school, right? And then they got married and they just ran their household. And they cooked dinner for their husband. And if they brought the boss home, she was supposed to be a good homemaker. And we'll talk about, again, that continued cult of domesticity that we've looked at. So the muckrakers are out there. Here is pretty much what we just talked about in a chart form, okay? Now, again, there are a few people on here that weren't in those earlier slides. We've talked about Thomas Naston here. I don't think you have to worry about knowing him. You should already know him. There's Jacob Riss, John Spargo. Upton Sinclair. We're going to do a reading from Upton Sinclair. It'll be in your folders. And we're going to talk about what he says about the food policies of America. And in 1906, we're going to get a Inspection Act. I mean, think about today when you pick up a can of food or a box, it's got what's in it, it's got the nutrients, all that comes from this eventually, right? Is it pure food? Is your meat like rotted and tainted? You're going to have people like Jane Addams, and you're going to have people like Margaret Sanger. Guys, Margaret Sanger is going to advocate for women to have control of their bodies, and she's going to do it through birth control. And it was illegal. It was illegal to ship birth control across state lines. You couldn't do it through the mail. Even though many women's magazines had ads in the back with hints of what this product was for, they couldn't call it birth control. And could women decide how many children they were going to have? And was that an important thing? And so the idea of women and their bodies, and we'll talk more about this. She sets up an agency called Planned Parenthood, which seems to be in the news a lot lately with some of the rulings that we've had. You got Frank Norris, who writes The Octopus, who, again, talks about railroads. You know, the octopus, those rails go out and connect to all parts of society. And Ida Tarbell, again, the history of the Standard Oil Company. We've mentioned her already. So, Tarbell Oil, and that's one way I remember that. So, the progressives. We're not going to talk about political democracy. I think I've held you long enough, and I know watching these online are a little harder. So we'll stop there, and when we join class on Monday, we're going to talk about how do the progressives want to change political democracy. We talked about social justice, right? Can you come in and do some matching on Monday? Can you come in and know some things? And I would encourage you to continue to read in the book through the parts on political democracy and continue to read economic justice, okay? I hope to see you Monday, and I hope you're all well and safe, and thanks for joining me today.